Welcome all our audiences and our listeners to the NIICE Viewcast. I'm Shrabana Barua, Research Associate with the Nepal think tank, which is based out of Kathmandu. Today we have with us a very special guest, a former diplomat, a research enthusiast, and a scholar, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia. Please welcome to our Viewcast Ambassador Bhatia.
Thank you very much. I really am grateful to the host institution and to you for organizing this.
Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia is a distinguished fellow, Foreign Policy Studies program at Gateway House. He's chair of FICCI's core group of experts on BIMSTEC, something that we will be talking about deeply, and its task force on the blue economy. He is a founding member of the Kalinga International Foundation. He has been a director general of the Indian Council of World Affairs based out of New Delhi. During a 37-year innings in the Indian Foreign Services, he served as ambassador to Myanmar and Mexico, as well as High Commissioner to Kenya and South Africa. Most interestingly, he is a critically acclaimed book author on Myanmar, India-Myanmar Relations, Changing Contours. He has been a senior visiting research fellow during 2011 to 13 at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, Singapore. A very warm welcome, Ambassador Bhatia, to our Viewcast.
Thank you very much.
Just to begin with the topic of your interest and a subject that you have been closely associated with, the BIMSTEC, there have been some issues about the lack of visibility of BIMSTEC in the last decade. And more recently, as you also mentioned in one of your articles in the Hindu, that we have seen some green shoots of BIMSTEC in the last 5 to 7 years. Do you think that because of the COVID situation, the pace at which BIMSTEC had started growing back or coming, being more discussed more often now, do you think because of COVID, there is going to be a lag in the pace of that development? Or do you feel that this has given us all the opportunity, all the BIMSTEC countries, we are really facing a common enemy in that sense? So do you think we have a forum before us where we can really engage at a deeper level and cooperate better? Your views, Ambassador Bhatia.
Thank you very much for packing several issues in that fundamental question about BIMSTEC. I know that my listeners are very well informed about this institution, but just in case some new people are joining in, perhaps it would be a good idea first for me to explain that BIMSTEC, which stands for the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical and Economic Cooperation, it's a real mouthful word. It essentially is referring to a sub-regional organization which has 4 countries from South Asia, that is Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh and India, and Sri Lanka, 5 countries actually, and 2 countries from Southeast Asia, that is Myanmar and Thailand. So this is the composition, and I think we should be clear that this is very different from the other organization, which is SAARC, and I'm sure you will bring it up sooner or later. The other point to also remember is that this sub-regional organization is meant to promote economic cooperation and accelerated economic growth among its member states by working in a number of areas or sectors of cooperation, which range from trade to technology to environment to cultural cooperation and the rest of them. There are quite a large number of sectors in which the organization has been working. Now, in that background, to talk about the visibility and the green shoots, etc., I think our viewers should recognize that this is an organization which began in 1997 with just 4 countries, that is Sri Lanka, India, Bangladesh, and Thailand. And then the others joined in. So it is assessed by scholars and also by those who have inside knowledge of the institution that in the first 20 years, BIMSTEC really had a rather modest record of achievements. it had three summit meetings, just three summit meetings at the level of the presidents and prime ministers. And they were making some movement, but it was fairly disappointing. The next period, the next 2 years, essentially, if we say the period from 2016 to 2018, is when we saw a lot of activism and progress in this organization. Why? Because you remember this was the time when India switched itself off from SAARC and decided to place a special attention on BIMSTEC. And this was the time India was hosting the BRICS summit. So BIMSTEC leaders were invited to take part and interact with the BRICS leaders in Goa. And before that, there was an outreach summit also of the BIMSTEC leaders. That really gave a very special salience to BIMSTEC. And from that period on to 2018, when the fourth summit of BIMSTEC took place in Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, it became clear that leaders wanted to give a lot of importance to SAARC and to consolidate its cooperation and achievement. And yet, paradoxically, what happened was two developments followed. One, that somehow in the media and the strategic community circles, we began to hear less and less about BIMSTEC from the Kathmandu summit onwards. And secondly, as you hinted, and I'm going to now elaborate, when COVID arrived in January and to our region, let us say in March, there was an expectation that very quickly there would be probably a video summit of BIMSTEC leaders in order to tackle not merely the health issues, but also the damages that were being caused to the economies of the member states. But nothing of the sort happened. And so it was becoming a bit puzzling until we learned that actually it was the SAARC leaders which met and started giving leadership to the South Asian region. So in a way, it is in this slide we began to study closely to know whether in the months and years ahead, we would have a brighter future, or somehow BIMSTEC is once again, slipping away from the radar. So at this point, I simply want to say that we have reasons to be hopeful, and I would probably go into them later.
Okay, thank you so much for that. You've interlinked both SAARC and BIMSTEC, and indeed it'll be interesting to see how that develops in the near future. But just interlinking that and taking from your point on SAARC. So even when we talk about SAARC, we saw that there was, almost at one point we were discussing it that it's an obsolete organization. And then we see that, that when Prime Minister Modi came to power, he invited the SAARC leaders. And then in his second swearing-in ceremony, like you said, he just moved away from SAARC and back to BIMSTEC. He invited the BIMSTEC leaders for his ceremony. And then again, like you said, that we were expecting that there is going to be a virtual summit on BIMSTEC, and instead there was one on SAARC now. And your view, Ambassador Bhatia, has been that in one of the panel discussion with Brookings India, you mentioned that from your point of view, we should look at both these multilateral forums as non-competing entities, really, and that both can develop parallelly, and this is how we should go about it, and they are very different sectoral areas that we are looking at. Should we, in that sense, assume that that's also New Delhi's view, what you are saying? And just to link with that how do you think that the other countries, other member states of SAARC and BIMSTEC look at your point of view, Ambassador Bhatia?
Again, a set of very well-packed questions. I have to remember and try to answer all of them. I think here we are talking about regional cooperation, first of all, in South Asia. SAARC, as we know, is the larger body, the older body. It has those 5 countries of South Asia, which we had listed earlier. But in addition, it also has 3 countries in the West, namely Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Maldives. SAARC was established in 1885. It made progress. In fact, it was the main show until 2014, 2015. It was meeting regularly. It had, it has a full-scale secretariat in Nepal. The BIMSTEC secretariat actually is in Dhaka. And in that sense, we can say the SAARC's diplomatic capital is Kathmandu, whereas BIMSTEC's diplomatic capital is in Dhaka. Then I think we should pause for a second to ask ourselves as to what happened, why India lost interest in SAARC. And I think here I would like to make a broad point, which is that in a regional body, member states have a contract with each other. Citizens and residents of a country cannot be used to harm and kill citizens and residents of another country through terrorism. Once that problem came through, the tolerance limits of India were reached, and that explains why Pakistan's activities resulted in a situation where India felt that it has to start looking at alternatives. But I will not go further into that, except to say that SAARC, in my view, still has a future. This region needs solid economic cooperation, and that is the reason it is my sincere view that this region, South Asia and the bridge to Southeast Asia, need both institutions. And that is why I would argue that SAARC and BIMSTEC are not competitors. They are certainly not substitutes. In fact, they are complementary to each other. BIMSTEC is nothing but a bridge organization between SAARC on one side and ASEAN, which deals with Southeast Asia, on the other. And therefore, actually, let me seize this opportunity to make an informal suggestion that given the impasse, but given also India's signal that it has not given up on SAARC at all, maybe a time has come when an informal meeting should take place between the Secretary General of SAARC and Secretary General of BIMSTEC, because they also have a responsibility to try to develop this complementarity. Now, as far as your question is concerned about this view that I'm expressing, that the two institutions are complementary, and whether it is my view or whether it is the view of the government of India, I have to be honest with you. I retired from the Foreign Service many years back, but I keep in touch with people, and I know the thinking, and from the strategic community, it is always our attempt to influence the thinking of governments of the region. Therefore, I think we all should remain optimistic about the future of both the organizations. And I think it is our responsibility as scholars to see that they work in a complementary fashion.
Absolutely. I think 2 points very well taken, Ambassador Bhatia. One thing about optimism, it's exactly what we need right now. And the point about SAARC and BIMSTEC just really being a bridge between South and Southeast Asia. Drawing from that, I come to the third question of this session. We are going to talk a little about Myanmar now. And since you've been an ambassador in Myanmar, you've been in Yangon for a couple of years. Also, like I mentioned in my introduction, you've written a book that's very well taken by the readers. When we speak in 2020 in June, the big elephant in the room again is China. And when it comes to China in Myanmar, we have we in the scholarly circle also, we have seen that it's not just the BRI that suddenly came in 2013 and the CMEC, but really China's ideas about reaching out to the Indian Ocean through Myanmar has been there since 1985. In an article in the Beijing Review, in fact, Panchi, the Vice Minister of Communication, is stated to have said that Myanmar is the bridge for its provinces like Yunnan and Sichuan to reach out to the Indian Ocean. And we see that today that is really becoming a reality. And when it comes to the most recent times, that is May, last month itself, we see that China really insisted on having a conversation about CMEC. The ambassador in Yangon went to visit the Deputy Minister of Finance and Industry to really talk about the implementation of CMEC at a time when the world itself is facing the pandemic. So since that has already been a strategic issue for the countries around, including India, how do you really read this development in Myanmar? What are your views on that, Ambassador Bhatia?
When I went to Myanmar as India's ambassador in 2002, and I stayed there for 3 years till 2005, from that period to now, I think it is very well documented and established that China's footprint in Myanmar has expanded in a very significant manner. Therefore, what is now happening on CPEC is something that is being monitored and observed very closely. The only issue that we really need to study is whether Myanmar's traditional policy of following a balanced foreign policy is still intact or not. Because the scholars of Myanmar or on Myanmar point out that traditionally, from the days of the Burmese kings, but later from Unu to Nevin to General Than Shwe, and subsequently even General Thein Sein, who was the first civilian leader in the mixed era. The idea was that there would be a balance between the major neighbors, India, Thailand, China. Then there would be a balance between China and ASEAN. And then there would be also a balance between ASEAN and the West. So it does seem to me at this stage that this balance, the traditional balance, has tilted somewhat markedly in favor of China. But whether that policy and that tendency and that constituency which favors a balanced or calibrated relationship exists, that is something I think we all need to study and explore further. There is no doubt that China or any other country promoting its economic interests in Myanmar or in any neighboring country, is something that you cannot object. The only difficulty that arises is that when these economic activities begin to generate implications which are adverse to our security, to the security interests of India or to any other neighbor, that is where the problems come. So I would say that the immediate effects of President Xi Jinping's famous historic visit to Myanmar, they are still unfolding. And I think it would be prudent on part of all regional members to keep an eye on this. If you allow me, I would just go back because I didn't answer one part of your earlier question.
When feel free to explain.
Yeah, when you asked, thank you. When you asked me as to whether other countries in SAARC have this specific view about SAARC or not. So I wanted to say that we know that two countries in particular, Nepal and Sri Lanka, have a slightly different approach from that of India. India is very clear that if terrorism continues to be an issue, then it has serious difficulty in working in SAARC. Whereas Nepal and Sri Lanka have been advocating greater flexibility. Now, my only point to viewers is for consideration is that if the kind of tragedy India has faced, your own citizens being killed by the citizens of a neighboring country, had this happened in Nepal or had this happened in Sri Lanka, public opinion would also be inflamed, and then the support for SAARC might have really been weakened. I think this is an angle, an Indian angle that needs to be factored in.
Well, thank you for that point. That's quite interesting, in fact, and something that I also want to get back again in the middle of the conversation. You mentioned something about the informal meeting. You suggesting really an informal meeting that could be held between the general secretaries of both SAARC and BIMSTEC. Well, that looks like a very positive response that we can, through our viewers, through this program, probably we can reach out to a larger audience on it. So thank you for that point also. Just another point regarding Nepal and Myanmar, since we are talking about Myanmar already. Last year, we saw that the president of Nepal, Vidya Devi Bhandari, visited Myanmar, the first, in fact, by a president in 39 years. And we see that there were a couple of MOUs signed, and Nepal itself is trying to, in a way, make a mark and engage with other partners around the neighbor. So do you think that that can really, the bilateral deepening of engagements with countries around India's neighborhood particularly, do you think that can also translate to a larger multilateral cooperation at, for example, SAARC or BIMSTEC? Ambassador Bhatia.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, this I would regard as a very positive trend, and it's a trend that needs to be encouraged and supported. A lot of people here in this country who are not terribly enthusiastic about regional cooperation, they say that our neighbors are actually not neighbors to each other. They are neighbors to each other only because of India. I do not believe in this theory. I believe that we are part of a larger civilizational heritage. Our history, culture, geography bind us together, and above all, our common interests keep us there. And therefore, yes, I agree with you. In fact, now that triggers my memories. When I was serving in Myanmar, we used to work very closely with the Nepalese mission. There used to be a chargé d'affaires, and we were together in almost everything that we were doing. There was absolutely no misunderstanding or tension of any kind whatsoever. And I must stress that Nepal enjoys a very special place in Myanmar, because, as you know, Myanmar is a country where the majority community follows Buddhism. They all know that Lord Buddha was born in Nepal, and therefore that historical, cultural, spiritual link is a great foundation for tourism promotion between the two countries, and building on that, undoubtedly, the larger economic cooperation. So I would very much welcome Nepal's growing friendship and cooperation with Myanmar as well as other neighboring countries.
I see you also trying to indicate that, the problem that particularly SAARC has had is India's big brotherly attitude. So, well, that doesn't look like that big a problem really, because looks like India wants such an engagement of Nepal with other neighboring countries. And it's not just because of India that they really engage with each other. That's an interesting point, Ambassador Bhatia. Thank you for that. Just coming to our concluding question, where do you really locate Nepal today in the SAARC and BIMSTEC narrative? And not just because you've been an ambassador earlier with the Indian Foreign Services, but also as a scholar, as a foreign policy analyst, what are your tips for Nepal to engage with these two forums in particular?
Thank you very much for asking me this question. I had the pleasure and honor to visit Nepal at a crucial time with a very important personality back in the 90s. This was Mr. P.V. Narasimha Rao, who was then the Foreign Minister of India, and he visited Nepal as the special envoy of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. There was a certain political set of developments that were happening, and Mr. Narasimha Rao went to play the role. I was part of his delegation, and I saw personally the special relationship that exists between India and Nepal. So in that light, to answer your question, I assess that Nepal has a critical and crucial role to play in promoting regional cooperation through both the platforms, through SAARC and through BIMSTEC. The one thing that we all have to remember, that member states of both the organizations cannot help the power asymmetry. India cannot help its size. Nepal cannot help the asymmetry of size, power, resources. But what we both need to remember is that taken together, for example, BIMSTEC membership, we are talking about 22% of the global population, 1.7 billion people. We are talking about almost 3 trillion economy. So we have a role to play. That is the reason why, the moment we picture India as the big brother, there is a problem, because then our neighbors do not like it, I think. And yes, therefore my own formula would be to say that, look, it is a family. We are all brothers or sisters. There is nobody big or small. There is a power asymmetry, but we can build around it in order to promote really peace, stability, prosperity in this region.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Bhatia, for that insightful discussion. And I'm sure earlier I know you had the complaint about how people didn't really know about BIMSTEC beyond the circles of think tanks and beyond the meetings of diplomats. So I hope with this interaction, our audience and our viewers and our listeners will have gained a lot of information as well as insight. And thank you so much once again for being with us. Ambassador Bhatia, it's been a pleasure for us at the NIICE family.
Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. Thank you.